12 men said no to me, and by the 12th I stopped pretending it was about manners, timing, or misunderstandings. It was about the chair. It was about what the chair announced the moment I rolled into a room full of standing people. Damaged, inconvenient, a life that would cost more than it would ever give back. My name is Elellanena Whitmore. I was 22 in Virginia in 1856, and I learned to read faces the way other women learned to read a ballroom, quick, sharp, without mercy. A man's eyes would find mine for a second, just long enough to decide I looked pleasant, educated, even pretty in the right light, and then his gaze would drop to the wheels, the footrests, the useless legs hidden by my skirt, and something would tighten around his mouth like a drawstring. That was the moment. That was always the moment. It didn't matter what my father promised, or how many acres of tobacco we owned, or how polished the silver looked on the dinner table. The chair made men honest in a way they did not want to be honest. And it made me see my own future like a corridor with doors closing one by one. Whitmore Estate sits in the Piedmont, 20 miles west of Charlottesville, where the hills roll into dark lines of forest and the fields stretch toward the Blue Ridge like a quiet threat. 5,000 acres, 200 enslaved people, a brick house my grandfather built in 1790 with white columns so whiter men could stand shoulder to shoulder and still leave room for pride. Pride was the main product of our land, if you asked me. Tobacco was second. I was born here in 1834, the only child of Colonel Richard Whitmore and Catherine Whitmore. My mother died 3 days after I arrived. Childbed fever, the kind of death people spoke about in soft voices because it made everyone remember how thin a line separated respectable from buried. My father never remarried. Some people praised him for devotion. Some whispered about coldness. I didn't know what it was. I just knew that the house was full of rooms and somehow still felt empty, and that my father raised me like a project he couldn't afford to fail. He taught me to read beyond what girls were supposed to read. Greek and Latin, French, figures, ledgers, politics, philosophy, things men argued about in libraries while women smiled and served tea. He told me, when I was young enough to believe anything said in a calm voice, that education would make me valuable. He intended to marry me well. I was his legacy. Then I fell off a horse. I was 8. I'd begged for that ride. I'd pleaded for a mount to spirited for me because I wanted to feel fast and fearless, and he indulged me because I was the only thing in the world that still softened him. The horse spooked at a snake. It reared. I remember the weightless moment, the sky turning, the sick surprise of the ground rising. I landed across a fallen log and heard a crack that did not sound like wood. It sounded like a sentence being finalized. The doctors came from Richmond and Philadelphia, men with clean hands and hard eyes who talked over my head like I was already an object. Their verdict was delivered with a gentleness that felt rehearsed. Permanent damage. My legs would never work properly again. Maybe some sensation, maybe some movement, but never walking the way girls walked into church in spring dresses, never dancing, never running across fields, never stepping easily into the ordinary life my father had planned for me. My father commissioned the finest wheelchair he could find: mahogany frame, leather seat, smooth wheels that glided over polished floors, and he built ramps and widened doorways and moved my bedroom to tea. He ground floor, as if carpentry could negotiate with fate, but he could not rebuild Virginia society. By 14, while other girls flirted at picnics and practiced being chosen, I watched through windows. By 16, the only men who came close to me did so to greet my father. By 18, my father's voice began to change when he looked at me, not softer, tighter, like a man watching a storm approach and measuring how much roof might survive. That was when he started the proposals. He did not call them that at first. He called them dinners, introductions, opportunities. But I knew what they were because I knew what I was in his mind. A problem with a deadline. The first was Thomas Aldrich from Lynchburg, 35, a tobacco man, respectable enough, but. My father straightened his shoulders when he said the name. My father presented me in the parlor like evidence. She reads Greek, he said, as if that might override what the chair said. Aldrich looked at me, looked at the chair, and asked to speak to my father privately before he even sat down. The study door closed, the voices were low. I didn't hear the words, but I knew the shape of them. My father came back alone and said, "He feels the situation isn't suitable." I asked, "Because I can't walk?" My father's eyes flickered away, and his silence confirmed it. The second was James Morrison, 40, a widower with 3 children. He stayed longer. He tried harder. Which almost made it worse. I heard him say clearly, as if he wanted me to hear it, "My children need a mother who can manage them physically." The third, fourth, and fifth arrived like seasons. Each man brought a different excuse, but the same verdict. One said he needed a wife who could stand beside him at social functions, not sit while others stood. Another said the wedding would be embarrassing, asked how I would process down an aisle, as if marriage was a performance and I had failed the casting. Someone else, crueler because he spoke like he was being practical, asked my father whether my injury meant I couldn't bear children. That rumor spread faster than any truth ever had. Doctors in Philadelphia told me my reproductive system was fine, that my spine did not control my womb, but facts are weak against gossip. By the time the 6th and 7th men appeared, they were already looking at me as if they were inspecting a defective broodmare. I watched their mouths form polite words while their eyes said something else. Waste. Then came the bargains. My father lowered his standards. He reached into other states. North Carolina, Maryland, Kentucky. He offered larger and larger dowries, as if money could bribe a man into forgetting the disgust he felt when he imagined lifting me from bed, or pushing my chair through mud, or being seen with me in public like an admission. Rejection 8 arrived with a smile. Rejection 9 arrived with a laugh. I remember number 9 because it was January 1856 and the man was William Foster, 50, portly, twice widowed, whiskey on his breath even at noon. My father offered him a third of our annual profits. Foster toured the property as if he already owned it, inspected barns, spoke to my father's lawyer, nodded at the figures. Then he met me. He didn't ask what I read. He didn't ask how I managed the household accounts. He asked, "Can you sew?" I said, "Not well. My hands have limited dexterity." He asked, "Can you cook?" I said I'd never learned. He asked, "Can you manage servants?" I said I could direct household operations from my chair. He turned to my father and said, "Colonel, your daughter is charming, but I need a wife who can perform wifely duties. This situation is untenable." It wasn't just rejection. It was a declaration that I was not a wife, not even the kind a desperate man could tolerate. After he left, I found my father alone in his study staring at the wall with bourbon in his hand, as if he was trying to drink a solution into existence. I told him he could stop. I said I didn't need a husband. I said I could help him manage, that he had taught me enough. He looked at me like he wanted to believe me, but could not afford it. "You know that's not how society works," he said. "A woman alone, especially you." And he gestured toward the chair like it was proof. He didn't mean to be cruel. That's what made it feel crueler. He wasn't insulting me. He was stating a law of nature. Our male relatives will inherit this estate, he said. Your cousin Robert will sell this place and give you some pittance. You'll end up dependent on charity. I told him to change his will. He said Virginia law wouldn't allow it, not the way he needed it to. He didn't say the rest, but I heard it anyway. Not an unmarried woman, not a disabled one. Not a daughter who couldn't be publicly displayed as intact and normal. That winter, I started to feel the house closing in. The long hallways, the tall ceilings, The number of rooms, none of it felt like space. It felt like a museum built around my failure. Servants moved quietly around me, careful not to show pity. But pity has its own sound. It lives in hesitations and eyes that slide away. I spent nights awake listening to the wind scrape the windows, imagining my father dead and my cousin's boots on the floorboards, imagining my chair rolled out of the way like an unwanted piece of furniture. I was angry, but it was a tired anger. It had nowhere to go. I was ashamed, and that shame made me crueler inside my own skull than any man had been to my face. Sometimes I caught myself thinking, if I could just stand for 1 minute, if I could just take 3 steps, if I could just be less of a spectacle. And then I hated myself for bargaining with my own body, like it was an enemy I could bribe. My father kept going because he couldn't tolerate the idea of leaving me vulnerable. Proposal 10 came in early February. The man didn't even bother coming inside. He met my father on the porch, took one look through the doorway at me in my chair, and said, loud enough for the air to carry it, "I won't be mocked." Mocked, as if marrying me would be a joke at his expense. I wanted to throw something at him, but my hands shook and I sat there in silk and lace, trapped in politeness. Proposal 11 came from a man my father had known at university. He spoke kindly to me, which almost convinced me for a moment, until he said, with the same gentle tone, "You deserve a companion, Miss Whitmore, but I cannot sign up for a lifetime of difficulty." He said it like a doctor giving a diagnosis. Proposal 12 was the worst because it was the most careful. My father invited the man, fed him well, poured him expensive liquor, showed him the library, showed him the ledgers, showed him the future. They spoke for an hour. Then the man came into the parlor, sat across from me, and instead of looking away, he looked right at my face and said, "You seem like a remarkable woman." My heart did something foolish. Then he placed his hands on his knees and continued, "But I need heirs, and I need a wife who can represent my household. I would rather not live my life explaining. That was it. I was something that would require explanations in public. I was a speech he did not want to give." When he left, my father didn't even try to soften it. He just sat behind his desk, tired to the bone, and said, "Every single man has declined." I remember the word declined because it sounded so neat, like a letter returned and opened. I said, "Then I won't marry." I said it with as much dignity as I could gather. "I'll stay here. I'll help you manage." My father's jaw flexed. He wasn't angry at me. He was angry at the wall he kept hitting. "I could die tomorrow," he said, "or I could live 20 years. Either way, I will die. And then, what happens to you?" I tried to argue. I tried to sound rational, but rationality doesn't stop a future you can see coming. That night I cried quietly because I refused to let anyone hear it. And I hated the sound of my own breath because it sounded like defeat. The next morning, my father asked me to come to his study. And the way he said it made my stomach drop. He didn't sound like a man with a new plan. He sounded like a man who had already crossed a line and was now dragging me over it behind him. The study smelled of paper and ink and bourbon that never fully left the wood. He didn't offer me a chair. I already had one. He stood by the window as if he needed the light on his face to get through what he was about to say. "I've found you protection," he began. My throat tightened. Protection. That word was always used when someone wanted to take your choice away and call it kindness. "Father," I said, "if you're about to tell me there is a 13th man." He cut me off with a small, sharp shake of his head. "No white man will marry you," he said, finally saying it plain. The bluntness hit like a slap, not because it was new, but because hearing it aloud made it permanent. "So I'm arranging something else." I stared at him, waiting for the shape of the else. He didn't look at me right away. He looked at the books on his shelves like they might supply a different sentence. "There is a man on this estate," he said, and for a split second I thought he meant an overseer, a hired hand, someone he could pay to act as guardian. Then he said the name, Josiah. The air in the room changed. Josiah, the blacksmith. The one people called the brute because he was enormous, because he made men step back without thinking, because he had hands that looked capable of bending iron like ribbon. My mouth went dry. "You can't mean," I started. My father's voice stayed steady, which made it worse. "I'm giving you to him," he said. "He will be responsible for your care and protection." My brain tried to reject it, like a body rejecting poison. "You're talking about an enslaved man," I said, too loud, too sharp. My father's eyes finally met mine. "Yes," he said. "I'm talking about the strongest man on this estate. A man I trust not to abandon you. A man who will not leave you because the law will bind him to the duty I give him." I felt heat rise into my face, rage, humiliation, fear, all tangled together. "You're treating me like property," I said. "Like you can hand me over, as if I'm a chair or a table." My father's shoulders sagged for one moment, just one. And in that instant, he looked older than I'd ever seen him. "I'm ensuring you survive," he said. And I recognized the tone. He was not asking what I wanted. He was telling me what he had already done. I told him I needed to meet Josiah before anything else happened. That I would not agree to be handed to a man I had never spoken to, enslaved or not, and my father nodded like he had already expected that concession would be necessary. That night I did not sleep. I lay awake listening to the house breathe around me, wood expanding and contracting, distant footsteps. The faint clink of chains from the quarters when the night guards shifted. And every sound fed the same question, looping in my skull. What does it mean to be given to someone when you already feel owned by your own body? I had seen Josiah from a distance for years. Everyone had. He was impossible to miss. He moved through the yard like a dark wall sliding across the landscape, 7 feet of muscle shaped by fire and iron. Shoulders so wide door frames looked nervous around him. People stepped aside without thinking. White visitors stared too long and then laughed like they hadn't been afraid. Enslaved people gave him space, not because he demanded it, but because his size made him dangerous in a world that punished danger without waiting for proof. I had never spoken to him. I had never needed to. He existed in a different category of my life, like weather or machinery, something that shaped the estate without belonging to my personal orbit. And now, my father wanted to bind my future to his body. When morning came, it arrived grey and cold. I dressed with care, not vanity but armor, choosing a plain dress that would not look like performance. I wanted to meet him as myself, not as an exhibit. They brought him to the house just after breakfast. I was in the parlor near the window. My chair angled so I could see the door without craning my neck. My father entered first, then Josiah followed, and my first thought was not fear, but scale. He had to duck to clear the doorway, actually fold himself down to enter, and even then the frame seemed to shrink around him. He filled the room without moving. His shirt was rough cotton, stretched tight across his chest, sleeves straining, brown arms that looked carved rather than grown. His hands were enormous, scarred, burned, thick with callus. Hands that had spent years gripping hammers and iron hot enough to glow. His head was bowed slightly, eyes lowered, posture trained by years of being in rooms where he was not allowed to forget what he was. When he spoke, it surprised me. His voice was deep, yes, but soft, careful, almost hesitant. "Yes, sir," he said to my father, and the gentleness of it collided with everything I thought I knew about him. My father cleared his throat and gestured toward me. "Josiah, this is my daughter, Elellanena." Josiah's eyes flicked up for half a second, and then dropped again, like he had touched a flame. I saw the whites of his eyes, dark brown irises. "Alert, cautious, miss," he said. My father launched into an explanation that sounded like a legal document dressed up as kindness, responsibility, protection, authority, welfare. Words stacked on top of each other to hide the truth that he was negotiating lives. I listened, without interrupting, because interrupting would have meant screaming. When my father finished, he looked at me expectantly, like he was waiting for gratitude or compliance. Instead, I looked at Josiah. "Do you understand what my father is proposing?" I asked. Josiah hesitated, and for the first time, he lifted his head fully and looked at me. Really looked, not at the chair. At my face. It felt like being seen after years of being scanned. "Yes, miss," he said. "He's saying I'm to be your husband, to look after you, carry you when needed, keep you safe." Husband. The word sat wrong in my ears, heavy and absurd. "And you agree to this?" I asked, even though the question itself felt cruel. He frowned slightly, confusion crossing his face. "I'm a slave, miss," he said carefully. "What I agree to doesn't usually matter." That honesty cracked something in me. My father shifted uncomfortably, but I pressed on. "But does it matter to you?" Josiah swallowed. "I don't know yet," he said. "I don't know you." "Neither do I said. My father cleared his throat again, sharper this time. "Perhaps you should speak privately," he suggested, already retreating toward the door. "I'll be in my study." He left us alone together, closing the door behind him with a sound that felt like a verdict. Silence filled the room, thick and awkward. Josiah stood there like he wasn't sure where to put himself, a giant man, unsure how to exist in a delicate space. "You can sit," I said finally, gesturing toward a chair. He glanced at it and then back at me. "That chair wouldn't survive me, miss," I almost laughed. "Almost. The sofa, then." He sat carefully on the edge, like he was afraid of breaking more than furniture. His knees were so high they seemed to crowd his chest. I took a breath. "They call you the brute," I said. Not accusing, just naming the thing that hovered between us. His shoulders tightened. "Yes, miss. Does it bother you?" He considered the question like it was new. "It used to," he said. "Now it just sounds like noise." I studied him. Up close, his face was weathered, lines carved by sun and labor. Beard thick and untrimmed. Eyes tired in a way I recognized. "Are you dangerous?" I asked. He met my gaze without flinching. "No, miss." "Are you cruel?" "No." "Would you ever hurt me?" He shook his head, once. Decisive. "Never. I swear it." There was no drama in the promise. No performance. Just a statement of fact as he understood it. Something in my chest loosened. "My father says you can read," I said. The reaction was immediate. Fear flashed across his face, sharp and unguarded. He looked toward the door like he expected it to open and swallow him. "Why?" he asked. "Because he said he saw you," I replied. "And because it matters to me." He hesitated for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Yes, miss. I can read." He waited for something: anger, punishment, disbelief. When none came, he continued, words tumbling out like he'd been holding them too long. "I taught myself. Old papers mostly. Some books when I can find them. I know it's not allowed." "What do you read?" I asked. His eyes lit despite himself. "Whatever's there, newspapers, sermons. Once I found a copy of Shakespeare in the library. No one touched it for years." I leaned forward. "Which plays?" His mouth curved, just slightly. "Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, The Tempest." "The Tempest," I echoed. "Why that one?" He shifted, warming to the subject like a man stepping into sunlight. "Because of Caliban," he said. "Everyone calls him a monster, but he was there first. His island was taken. He was taught language so he could be ordered. They say he's savage, but he's treated like an animal." Sounds familiar. The room seemed to sharpen around us. I had spent years discussing philosophy with men who never said anything half as honest, You're right, I said. It does. He stopped abruptly, as if remembering himself. I'm sorry, miss. I shouldn't speak so freely. Please do, I said. No one ever speaks freely to me. That surprised him. Why not? Because they think I'm fragile, I said. Or broken. Or something that needs careful handling. I tapped the arm of my chair. This thing speaks for me before I ever open my mouth. He nodded slowly. People look at my size and decide what I am, too, he said. They don't ask. We sat there for a long moment. Two people quietly admitting the same wound, from different sides of the world. Josiah, I said, testing his name on my tongue. If we do this, I need to know something. Will you treat me like a burden? His eyes widened. No. Miss. Will you resent me? No. Will you see me as something you're trapped with? He thought about it, really thought, and then said, I see you as a person who didn't choose what happened to her. Same as me. The simplicity of it hit harder than any romance could have. I felt tears sting my eyes and hated myself for it. Call me Elellanena, I said suddenly. He stiffened. That wouldn't be proper. Nothing about this is proper, I said. If we're going to live tied together by my father's decision, I need you to see me as more than miss. He nodded slowly. Elellanena, he said, and hearing my name in his voice felt like being addressed for the first time in years. And I want you to know something, he continued, quieter now. You're not unmarriageable. Those men were blind. Any man who can't see past a chair doesn't deserve the woman sitting in it. The words landed deep, clean, without pity. I realized then how starved I had been for that kind of recognition. Will you do this? I asked. Will you agree to my father's plan? He didn't hesitate. Yes, he said. I'll protect you. I'll care for you. And I'll try to make this work for both of us. When my father returned, he found us shaking hands, my small hand swallowed by Josiah's massive one. And for the first time since the accident, the future did not look like a corridor closing in. It looked dangerous, yes, and uncertain, but it also looked alive. The arrangement began on the 1st of April, 1856, and I remember the date because it felt like a cruel joke the world was playing on us. My father gathered the household staff in the back parlor, read a few Bible verses about duty and protection, and announced that Josiah was now responsible for my care and safety, and that his word carried my father's authority where my welfare was concerned. No one clapped. No one smiled. The enslaved people watched the floor. The overseers watched my father's face for cues. I watched Josiah, who stood very still, jaw set, eyes forward, as if bracing for a blow that might come later. A room was prepared for him beside mine, connected by a door but separate enough to maintain a fiction of propriety that fooled no one who thought about it for more than a second. He moved his few belongings that afternoon, spare clothes, a handful of books he had hidden and guarded for years, tools from the forge worn smooth by his hands. The first days were an exercise in discomfort. I had spent 14 years being cared for by women who knew how to move around me without making me feel exposed. Josiah was a man, enormous, careful to the point of stiffness, suddenly responsible for tasks that required intimacy neither of us had rehearsed. The first time he helped me dress, he kept his eyes fixed on the wall like it might accuse him. The first time he carried me when the ground was too uneven for the chair, he asked permission before touching me, his voice low, his hands steady, but trembling just enough that I could feel the effort of restraint. I learned the weight of my own dependence in new ways. It wasn't just physical. It was the knowledge that every movement required trust, and trust felt dangerous when the law said one of us owned the other. I told myself, over and over, that this was survival, not sentiment, that if I stayed clear-eyed and disciplined, I would not fall into fantasies that could only end in ruin. Josiah approached his duties with a gentleness that felt deliberate, practiced, like a vow he renewed each morning. He asked before he acted. He explained what he was doing even when it seemed unnecessary. When something embarrassed me, he pretended not to notice. When something humiliated me, he met my ears afterward and waited until I spoke first, giving me back a piece of control I had lost somewhere along the way. It unsettled me how safe I felt with him so quickly, and that unsettled feeling made me watch myself carefully, as if I were a stranger capable of betrayal. By the end of April, we had found a rhythm. Mornings, he helped me prepare and carried me to breakfast. Then he went to the forge, and I went to the library, where ledgers and correspondence waited. Afternoons, he returned, soot still clinging to his skin, and we spent time together. Sometimes I watched him work, the way he moved iron with confidence and patience, heating it until it glowed and then shaping it with strikes that were precise rather than violent. Sometimes he read to me. His reading improved quickly once he had access to real books and my quiet corrections. He stumbled over long sentences at first, then smoothed them out, his voice finding a cadence that made poetry feel like it belonged to him. Evenings were for talking. We talked like people who had been kept quiet too long. About his childhood on another plantation, about his mother, sold away when he was 10. The memory of her voice fading faster than he wanted to admit, about the punishments he'd endured for mistakes that weren't mistakes, just evidence of being human in a system that did not permit it. I talked about my mother, about growing up watched but untouched, about the accident and the way it had split my life cleanly into before and after. We did not talk about love. We did not talk about the future beyond the next day. We spoke as if the present were the only safe place to stand. In May, something shifted in me without asking permission. I was watching Josiah at the forge when the thought arrived fully formed, sudden and reckless. I want to try. I heard myself say it before I had time to retreat. He looked up, confused. Try what? The hammer, I said. I want to try. His immediate reaction was no, not cruel, not dismissive, but afraid. Afraid for me. Afraid of the heat, the weight, the risk. Afraid of being responsible if I got hurt. I pressed anyway, my voice tight with something I hadn't felt in years. Everyone assumes I can't, I said. Let me try. He studied me for a long moment, reading my face the way iron reads heat. Then he nodded. He set it up carefully, safer than he needed, too, choosing a small piece of metal, a lighter hammer. He positioned my chair close to the anvil and showed me where to strike. The first blow was weak, the second barely better. My arms burned almost immediately, a deep ache spreading into my shoulders. Sweat ran down my back. I wanted to stop. I wanted to laugh it off and say I had proven the point. Instead, I kept going. Again. Again. The metal bent, just slightly. Josiah lifted it and held it up like evidence. You did that, he said. The words cracked something open. I was laughing and crying at the same time, breathless, humiliated by my tears and proud in a way that felt new and dangerous. I made something, I said, with my hands. You're stronger than you think, he replied. From that day, the forge became my refuge. I couldn't do heavy work, but I could do enough. Hooks, simple tools, small decorative pieces. My body ached in ways it hadn't since childhood. Honest pain that came from effort rather than failure. My legs still did not work, but my arms did, my hands did. And in the forge, that mattered. June brought another revelation, quieter but deeper. We were in the library one evening, the windows open to let in the thick summer air. Josiah was reading Keats, his voice steady now, the words landing where they were meant to land. A thing of beauty is a joy forever, he read. Do you believe that? I asked without thinking. He considered it. I think beauty in memory is permanent, he said. The thing itself fades. The memory stays. What's the most Beautiful thing you've seen? I asked, curious and unguarded. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, you, at the forge, covered in soot, laughing. My heart stumbled. I told myself to shut it down, to correct him, to put the moment back in its place. Instead, I asked him to say it again. He did. He didn't dress it up. He didn't soften it. He said I was beautiful and meant it in a way that had nothing to do with pity. Something in me leaned toward that truth before I could stop it. I reached for his hand. He let me. His hand was warm and scarred and careful, holding mine like it was something that could be damaged if he forgot himself. Do you see me? I asked. Yes, he said. All of you. The words felt like a risk. I knew what loving him would mean. I knew the danger. I knew the consequences, and still, when I said I thought I was falling in love with him, the relief that followed was like breathing after being underwater too long. He told me he had loved me since our first real conversation, since I asked him about Shakespeare and listened to the answer. He said it quietly, like a confession. We kissed, there in the library, surrounded by books that would condemn us. My first kiss at 22 with a man the law said was property. It felt less like transgression and more like truth, finally finding a place to stand. We were careful after that. Careful in public. Careful with our faces, our hands, our distance, in private. We were simply together. We built something fragile and real inside a structure that was never meant to hold it. We learned each other's rhythms, each other's fears, when we became intimate. It was marked by the same gentleness that defined everything Josiah did with me. He watched my face more than my body, adjusted at the slightest sign of discomfort, treated my dependence not as weakness, but as a trust he would not abuse, for 5 months. We lived like people who knew the clock was ticking, but refused to look at it. I was happier than I had ever been, and that happiness terrified me because I knew it was visible. My father noticed the change. He saw my confidence, my strength, the way I laughed now without forcing it. He asked no questions, or maybe he asked them and didn't want the answers. By October, our world felt almost normal. That illusion shattered on December 15th. We were in the library, careless in the way only people who have been careful too long can be. We didn't hear the door open. We didn't hear footsteps. We heard my father's voice, cold and precise, saying my name. We sprang apart like guilty children. Josiah dropped to his knees immediately, instinct overriding everything else. My father stood in the doorway, his face a study in shock, anger, and something like grief. You're in love with him, he said, not a question. I could have lied. I could have saved myself and destroyed Josiah. I didn't. Yes, I said. And he loves me. This was mutual. I told him I had initiated it. I told him to punish me if he needed to punish someone. My father ordered Josiah out of the room, and then turned on me with a fury I had never seen. He spoke of ruin, of scandal, of danger. I spoke of happiness, of being seen, of what it meant to finally feel whole. We argued like two people who loved each other and could not agree on what love required. When he threatened to sell Josiah, the room went cold. When he said he wouldn't, because he had watched me come alive over the past months, hope fled. So bright it hurt. He told me he needed time, that if this continued, there was no place for it in Virginia. I said I was prepared for that reality. He said he would try to find a way. That night, Josiah and I held each other, like people clinging to a plank in dark water, knowing land existed somewhere, but not knowing how far away it was. My father took 2 months to decide our fate, and those weeks felt longer than the 14 years I had spent learning how to live inside limits. Nothing was said outright, but everything felt provisional, like we were moving through a house already marked for fire. Josiah and I kept our routines because stopping would have meant admitting how fragile everything was. He still rose early, still helped me dress, still carried me when the ground demanded it, still went to the forge with the same discipline he had always shown. I still worked in the library, still managed accounts, still spent hours at the anvil, shaping small pieces of metal that made me feel capable in a way nothing else did. On the surface, nothing changed. Underneath, every sound carried threat. Every knock at the door felt like the beginning of an ending. We spoke less freely, not because the feelings had faded, but because we were afraid of exhausting them before we knew whether we were allowed to keep them. At night, when the house went quiet, we lay awake on opposite sides of the connecting door, sometimes pressing our palms against the wood like it could transmit reassurance. I thought constantly about what my father might do. I knew the options even if he hadn't spoken them aloud. He could sell Josiah, send him south where plantations swallowed men whole and spit out bones. He could separate us under the guise of protection, invent some other arrangement that left me alive and hollow. He could decide that love was a luxury neither of us deserved. I tried to imagine surviving any of those outcomes and failed. For the first time since my accident, the thought of living without someone felt more frightening than the thought of dying. When my father finally summoned us to his study in late February of 1857, my hands shook so badly Josiah had to steady them before we entered. We sat across from my father, me in my chair, Josiah perched awkwardly on a chair too small for him, our knees almost touching, our hands clasped in open defiance of propriety. My father looked at us for a long moment before speaking, like a man memorizing a scene he knew he would never see again. "There is no way to make this work here," he said at last. His voice was tired, stripped of ceremony. "Not in Virginia. Not anywhere in the South." My chest tightened. I had known this was coming, but knowing something doesn't make it hurt less. He continued, methodical, as if listing facts could keep emotion at bay. "If I keep Josiah here, as your declared protector, suspicion will grow. Someone will investigate. The law will not protect you. It will punish you. You will both be destroyed." I felt Josiah's hand tense around mine. I opened my mouth to argue, to beg, to say I didn't care, but my father raised a hand. "So, I am offering an alternative," he said, and that word offering felt like a lifeline thrown into dark water. He turned to Josiah. "I am going to free you." The room tilted. I couldn't breathe. "Legally," my father continued, "with papers that will stand up in any northern court. I am also giving my daughter funds enough to start a new life, and letters of introduction to abolitionist contacts in Philadelphia." Josiah made a sound I had never heard from him before, half sob, half laugh, like his body didn't know which reaction was safer. "Sir," he said, voice breaking, "I can't, you can." My father cut in, "And you will." He looked at me then, eyes sharp with something like resolve. "I am also arranging a legal marriage," he said, "before you leave. If you are going to face the world together, you will do so with whatever protection the law can still offer you." Tears streamed down my face without permission. I thanked him over and over, the words tumbling out messy and inadequate. He told me not to thank him yet. He told us the truth plainly, that life in the North would still be hard, that prejudice would follow us, that money would run out faster than we expected, that being an interracial couple would cost us things we hadn't even imagined. Then he asked if we were certain. I didn't hesitate, neither did Josiah. He promised my father, with a seriousness that filled the room, that he would spend the rest of his life making sure I never regretted this choice. My father nodded once, sharply, like a man sealing a deal. The next week blurred into paperwork and quiet preparations. Lawyers came and went. Documents were drafted, signed, sealed. Josiah's freedom papers were placed in his hands, and he carried them like something sacred, checking them again and again, as if they might vanish if he looked away. The marriage took place in Richmond, in a small church with a minister who asked few questions and kept his voice low. There were no flowers, No guests beyond my father and two witnesses. I wore a simple dress. Josiah stood beside me, a free man, his back straight, his eyes steady. When we spoke our vows, the words felt less like promises and more like statements of fact. We were already bound. The law was just catching up. I took his name and kept my own, unwilling to sever myself entirely from the man who had raised me and then, finally, let me go. We left Virginia on March 15th in a private carriage my father arranged. Our entire life fit into two trunks: books, clothes, tools from the forge, Josiah's papers. My father embraced me before we departed, his grip fierce, his voice rough. When he told me to write, to tell him I was safe, to tell him I was happy, I promised I would. Josiah shook his hand and said simply, "I will protect her." My father said, "That is all I ask." The road north felt unreal. Each mile put distance between us and a place that had shaped us both and then rejected us. Josiah expected to be stopped at any moment, to have his papers challenged, to be dragged back. I watched his face at every checkpoint, felt his relief each time we passed without incident. When we crossed into Pennsylvania, he exhaled like a man surfacing after a long dive. Philadelphia was loud and crowded and alive in a way Virginia had never been. There were free black communities there, abolitionists. People who looked at us with curiosity, rather than immediate hostility. We found a modest apartment in a neighborhood where our existence raised eyebrows, but did not raise mobs. Josiah opened a blacksmith shop with the money my father had given us. He worked harder than anyone, his reputation spreading quickly. People trusted him because he was skilled and because his size, once a source of fear, became a guarantee of strength. I managed the business, kept the accounts, negotiated contracts. The education Virginia society had deemed useless suddenly mattered. Within a year, Freeman's Forge was thriving. In November of 1858, I gave birth to our first child, a boy we named Thomas. He was perfect, watching Josiah hold him, that massive man cradling a newborn with infinite care. I understood fully what we had risked and why. More children followed. William, Margaret, James, Elizabeth. We raised them in freedom, taught them pride in both sides of their heritage, sent them to schools that would accept them. In 1865, Josiah built something for me that changed my life again. Metal braces for my legs, connected to a support around my waist. With them and crutches, I could stand. I could walk, awkwardly, imperfectly, but on my own feet. The first time I did, I cried like the 8-year-old girl I had been when I fell. Josiah told me I had always walked, that he had just given me different tools. My father visited us twice before he died. He saw our life. He saw that his radical decision had created something beautiful. When he passed in 1870, he left me a letter telling me I had never been unmarriageable, that society had been blind, and that giving me to Josiah had been the smartest decision he ever made. Josiah and I lived together for 38 years. We grew old. We watched our children become adults, watched them build lives we could only have dreamed of. I died on March 15th, 1895. Exactly 38 years after we left Virginia. Pneumonia took me quickly. Josiah held my hand as I went, and I thanked him for seeing me, for loving me, for making me whole. He died the next day. Our children said his heart simply stopped. But they knew better. We are buried together in Philadelphia, under a shared stone that tells the truth plainly. We lived, we loved, and for a time, against everything, that was enough.